Hey guys, what's going on? This is John from Friends to Your Benefits. You may have heard that many states out there are adding paid medical and family leave mandates that impact employees and employers alike. And Colorado is one of the latest examples out there of having a brand new mandate that will certainly go a long way to providing benefits to employees, but it definitely comes with a cost. Joining us today to learn a little bit more about that, we have Hannah Furlong and Michael Pellegrino from Lincoln Financial. Hey, Hannah and Mike, how's it going? Welcome to the show. So, Hannah and then Mike, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'll start. So again, my name is Hannah Furlong. I have been with Lincoln Financial for over 10 years. So my background is entirely with insurance carriers. I've managed short-term disability claims early on in my career. And then I also worked as an absence consultant. So I've counseled employers just about their benefit programs and considerations for kind of private plan handling and things like that. And most recently, I am now a senior product manager, which is why I'm here today to talk about Colorado paid family and medical leave.
We'll save all the tough questions for you.
Exactly.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, my name is Mike Pellegrino. I am a senior sales rep in Lincoln's New York market. I've been with the organization since 2008. Kind of hard to think all that time that's flown by here, but I have spent most of my time, working with different groups, various different sizes and degrees of complexity. But over the last, let's call it 3 to 5 years, I've really geared my time working in the large case market. Oftentimes the paid family leave has become, one of their biggest hurdles, managing it, understanding all the different leaves. I also have the perspective of working in the New York market. New York was kind of the pioneer here in adding that first paid family leave. And so again, working with many different groups, specifically trying to wrap our hands around paid family leave and how they can best manage it. And as you'll hear from Hannah in a bit, Lincoln's really, as a lead leader, spent a lot of time and effort and money in trying to make sure our groups are educated and understanding what their options are.
I appreciate that, Hannah and Mike. And Mike, it seems like it was just yesterday that New York did add their mandate, but it's been a few years now. So looking forward to our conversation today. So Hannah, I'm going to start with you. So let's talk about Colorado specifically, right? And the Colorado PFML. So first, let's start with the basics, right? So who's actually eligible or subject to the law?
Yeah, so I'll start it off easy. So if you're a private employer and you have one or more employees in the state of Colorado, this is going to apply to you. So the state does have additional guidelines for, how you count these employees. So you need to have employed the employee for at least 20 weeks or have paid at least $1,500 within a quarter within the past year for that employee to count. But really, private employer, you have one employee in Colorado, this is going to apply to you. If you're in government, it's a little bit different. So federal government is excluded, state government is included. And then for fun, if you're a local in the local government, you can either opt in or opt out of the benefit. But private employer, one employee in Colorado, this is really going to apply to you.
So let's talk a little bit more about the eligible employees, right? So I'm thinking about this out loud. So there's still a lot of employees out there who happen to be working remote, right? So if you're working remote in Colorado, but the employer is based elsewhere, does this mandate still apply to you?
Right. Yeah, it's going to be where the work is localized. So yes, if you're working in Colorado, even if your employer is in New York, this is going to apply to that employee. So for eligible employees, it's a very low earnings threshold as well to qualify. So if you're an employee and you've earned at least $2,500 in the first four of the last five completed calendar quarters, you're going to be eligible for this. So it's really going to be part-time employees can qualify, seasonal employees can qualify with that earnings threshold of $2,500.
So it sounds like pretty much it applies to all employers who have at least one employee in Colorado. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So let's talk about the other side, right? So if you're an employee, right, and you want to take a benefit, what does the benefit actually look like?
Yeah, so it's going to be up to 12 weeks of paid leave for these employees. There is an exception if you have pregnancy or childbirth complications, you can actually get an additional 4 weeks. So for most employees, you're going to see 12 weeks of paid leave. But then for those pregnant employees, it can be up to 16 weeks of paid leave. And it's a weekly benefit. So there's a tiered benefit calculation, so it's a little bit complex. I won't read you the whole definition, but ultimately it can be up to 90% of the employee's average weekly wage, just depending on what their earnings are compared to the state average weekly wage.
So speaking of which, I'm sure this isn't free, right? With anything, there's no free lunch in life. So how are contributions actually calculated for this?
Yeah, so it's going to be actually based off of both employer and employee contributions. So under the state plan, it's going to be 0.9% of the employee's wage. And that employer employee contribution split is going to be 50-50. So 50% employer funded, 50% employee funded. But as it is with state benefits, there's always an exception. So if you have less than 10 employees nationwide as an employer, you do not have to contribute the 50% employer portion of it, but you do still need to comply with that 50% employee.
Hmm. And is there any cap, right? So I see with some of the absence products out there, there's typically, a cap. LTD is a perfect example. Is there a cap or is this an uncapped cost for employers and employees?
So the cap is going to be based off of the Social Security wage cap. So
Okay.
that's what you would use for that. Yep.
Okay. And thinking about this, right? So many employers out there, many offer short term disability today, and some offer, let's say, paid parental leave, and they may offer some different leave products that are out there. Is there any actual coordination between the Colorado mandate and what employers may offer on their own?
That is a great question because that's probably the biggest one that we get. Employers have their existing benefits, so how is this going to work, right? So Colorado has two different buckets of how employer paid leave is going to coordinate with Colorado PFML. So I'll start with your example, right? We have short-term disability benefits and we have paid parental leave. So in that instance, programs like these are going to coordinate with the Colorado PFML. So they're going to run concurrently. So you're going to see the short-term disability happening at the same time as the Colorado paid family medical leave. And the short-term disability payment will be reduced by the amount that the employee would receive under Colorado PFML. So employers are able to dictate that these need to run concurrently, but they also should make sure their policies reflect that. And then also they need to let the employee know in writing that they are going to coordinate these benefits. So I gave that example of short-term disability, but paid parental, as long as that coordination is included in the policy, is going to be the same, where you can run those two concurrently and then just reduce your paid parental leave payments by the amount that the employee would also be receiving under Colorado PFML.
Appreciate the insight, Hannah. So, one thing that I've seen some of the states allow is that some of the states will allow a private plan. And depending on the state, it may make sense to actually do a private plan versus going through the state. So, can you guys just walk me through that? Does Colorado make sense to perhaps look at a private plan, or is that off the table here?
Yeah, so Colorado does allow for private plans, and we have a lot of employers that are considering a private plan. There are some, kind of factors that go into whether or not a private plan is going to work for a particular employer. So some things that we recommend thinking about is first your employee demographic, right? So where are your employees located? We see some employers really get overwhelmed with the administration when they have employees in multiple states with multiple state benefits. So there would be a benefit to go with a private carrier where you can consolidate, that administration so the employer doesn't have to deal with multiple states. We also see employers think a little bit about that employee experience. So when you have the introduction of a state program, employees will now need to go to the state to apply for those benefits and then also have to work with their private carrier, as you mentioned, right, for the short-term disability, for their paid parental leave. And so that split administration sometimes can get a little confusing for employees. So employers may want to consider a private plan, to ease that burden for employees.
One of the things that I would add is because been out there in the market, and as I mentioned initially, talking to many employers that are dealing with this struggle. Oftentimes, I've heard groups say, "Hey, we don't really want to be involved with this paid family leave program, so we'll just let it go through the state." Sort of thinking about that as being the easier route. And one of the things I like to kind of to bring them back and talk about and just kind of probe a bit more on is to say, if you are a larger employer, specifically, you probably have, as Hannah mentioned, and John, you asked about that coordination of benefits. So you probably have a self-funded STD plan. And if you have that self-funded STD plan, oftentimes the hurdle that groups have that they're coming to Lincoln for expertise on is our ability to manage that on their behalf and also to report out to them in a quick manner so that they're able to then know whether or not to pay that employee and what offsets to pay them, because you don't want to overpay an employee and then be asking for a refund, right? And so what I'll remind them is, hey, this state plan, it might be the easier path of choosing where to go initially, but in the long run, where do you think you're going to get better service? And I use the analogy of a DMV, for example. DMV is a private entity. And so what I would suggest is, you are already getting reporting from Lincoln. Harmonizing that plan with Lincoln allows similar reporting then on the Colorado benefits, as well as the whole picture, which gives them that information in their hands in a more real time so that they can pay their employees and be more precise versus a state plan where they might not get reporting. There's probably less accountability, no account manager. And so again, to think about it more holistically. And another thing I point out is that this is now a benefit that would offset that STD plan, right? So there could be financial savings on their end that they're not thinking about. So even if it's more expensive to go with Lincoln, the administration, enhancements they're going to get are probably worth that spend, and they'll realize the savings by way of those offsets that it'll be worthwhile. But to kind of hammer home the point, we've actually been more competitive than the state plan in a lot of these most recent quotes that I've seen as well.
So there is some potential cost savings. So it sounds like it could be that your rate could be better than where Colorado sets the rate. And then also, I guess there could be some synergies with the STD plan and perhaps, I guess, some of the other leave plans that employers may offer. Is that fair, Mike?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And there's more than sort of meets the eye there. So from a rate perspective, straight rate perspective, there's many times, I think we've had a couple, John, right, in the last couple months where we're actually saving money. And then also, offering that more harmonized experience from a claimant perspective and also that reporting and accountability. But in a state like Colorado, there's been, in many of these states, have a front year of funding, right, where employers are already paying into that fund. So Colorado specifically, if an employer is to file for that exemption and to file their application with the state to go with, let's say, a Lincoln Financial or private carrier prior to October 31st, the state has actually mentioned that they would be refunding all that money paid. So the rate may be cheaper, but you also get a refund of some of that money that was used initially to fund or to start building up that fund to start managing claims. So again, it could be realized in twofold, and also, again, giving that more streamlined experience to your employees.
No, appreciate that perspective. So, Mike, let's talk about the private plans a little bit more detail, right? So, some employers out there say, "Oh, I like the idea of a private plan, right? But if I happen to go with, let's say, Lincoln's private plan, am I locked into a private plan forever? Or perhaps can I change in the future if the state decides to change the parameters of the mandate?" Walk me through that.
Yeah, and I think I would tag team this one with Hannah if I could. But yeah, what I would say is you're not locked in. And oftentimes, because of what I just mentioned, I always will say to a group, if Lincoln has a lower rate, if we're going to be offering that more harmonized experience for your employees, and you can potentially save that fronting money, give Lincoln the first chance, right? But if you're not loving it and you want to go move to the state plan, you can, right? And I don't think there's any restrictions specifically to Colorado, right, Hannah, that they wouldn't be able to go back to the state fund the following year or whatever they would want.
Right, you're correct. They can go back to the state plan. There are notice requirements. States love their notice requirements. So you would have to give 30 days at least notice to the state that you're going to terminate the private plan, and then also 30 days notice to your employees. But to Mike's point, you can, start with a private plan. When you're approved for up to 8 years, but you're not locked in for those 8 years. So if you did decide to go back to the state plan, you can definitely do that.
So it sounds like you do have some choice in the future if you decide to perhaps do private versus public or vice versa.
Exactly, yes. And you can also go into a private plan at any time. So if you're thinking, I'm not ready for January 1st, I don't want to think about this right now, but a couple months later, you're thinking now might be a good time, I can focus on it. You can start in the state plan and then go into a private plan. But January 1st is a good time to do it because to Mike's point, you're going to get that refund of premiums. And this is only for if you're going to start that private plan as of January 1st.
So let's talk about preparing for 1/1/24. So what should employers really be doing right now as it relates to this Colorado PFML?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest thing that employers need to consider right now is whether or not they're going to go with a private plan. So as Mike mentioned, that deadline to submit your application for a private plan is October 31st. So that's coming up quickly. So employers are going to want to make that decision so they can make sure they apply in time to get that refund of premiums. Employers also should be educating themselves on the benefit now. It's really, they're going to start to get questions from employees. So kind of staying up to date on the developments of Colorado PFML will be important too, just to make sure they're ready for those employee questions and for the benefit to go live.
I'm sure some additional states are planning to add additional leave mandates in the future. So can you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Yes, so we're going to have a very active 2026. So we have 4 states that we're watching right now who are going to have benefit programs in 2026. So Maryland, Delaware, Maine, and Minnesota all have committed to programs for 2026. So they are definitely coming fast and furious.
And I'm sure they all look different.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
It would be great just, from an national employer perspective, if there was kind of one unified federal plan, but I guess that's the way it is right now. Right, Hannah and Mike?
Right. I mean, it's been proposed in the budget for federal leave, but it gets proposed. There's a lot of negotiation that needs to happen. So there's no real date that we're looking at that we're going to see this. And I always caution against, being so optimistic that a federal leave is going to solve all of our problems. The states are competitive. They want to provide better benefits. So I think we'll still see states want to provide a benefit that's richer than what the federal leave may provide. So I don't think there's going to be an easy solution to these state programs anytime soon.
And it's going to continue to be more and more complex for employers. Mike and Hannah, really appreciate your perspective. So before we go, can you just, I guess, let's say there's someone out there and they want to learn a little bit more about this Colorado mandate or perhaps some of the other mandates out there. Where can they go to perhaps connect with you or learn more?
Yeah, I could take that one. And John, one of our commitments here at Lincoln is to make sure our customers and consultants are educated on all these states. Like we have employees that are working with each state and the regulators, right? And so we're typically on the front lines learning some of these regulations that are changing right up until the effective date as soon as they're happening, right? So our commitment is to make sure our employers, customers, new employers coming on board with understanding what their roles and responsibilities are, what the benefits are, and ultimately what their options are, right? So to help educate them on, here's the options to stay with the state plan versus go with a private plan. And ultimately, our job is to educate and help make them or enable them with the information to help them make the best decisions. So we'll have that sort of hand-to-hand, person-to-person conversation, but we also have developed a couple of websites. We have a website, I think, for each specific state, but for Colorado, the website is lfg.com/COPFML. And if you wanted the more holistic picture, more information about just leave in general in all of the states, we have what we call our Lincoln Absence Advisor. And the website for that is lfg.com/absence advisor, one word. And then always you can come to any Lincoln representative that in your local market to gain any more information that you're looking for.
Well, Mike and Hannah, really appreciate the perspective. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
And for our audience out there, we want to hear from you. What questions do you have on some of the emerging paid family leaves that are out there? Comment.